"Do you really expect us to pay for this?" one of the men sneered, his gold watch glinting in the bright afternoon sunlight. Emily Carter, the young waitress, froze for a moment, her hands tightening around the tray she had been carrying. Her shift had been exhausting, 6 hours on her feet, barely a pause to breathe, and here were 3 men, impeccably dressed, refusing to honor the simple courtesy of paying for their meal. If this story touched your heart, show your love, like, share, and comment your thoughts. Emily's heart raced, a mix of fear and frustration rising inside her. She had seen plenty of rude customers in her years at the luxurious Magnolia Bistro, but there was something particularly unsettling about the air of entitlement radiating from these men. They were laughing among themselves, whispering, as if it were some private joke that she wasn't in on. "Sir, I'm just doing my job," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "If there's a problem with your bill, I can call my manager right away." The man in the center, tall and broad-shouldered, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Call your manager? We don't need any managers. We'll decide what we want to pay, and right now, we're deciding 0. His companions chuckled, throwing small, condescending glances at her. Emily's stomach sank. She had worked hard to make it through college, juggling 2 jobs to support herself and her younger brother. Every tip, every dollar mattered. But standing in front of her were 3 men who believed their money and status could exempt them from decency. I can't let that happen, sir," she stammered, trying to summon courage she didn't feel. "This is a violation of restaurant policy. I can't just let you leave without paying." "Ah, but you see, little girl," the second man said, leaning forward, "we're not afraid of a waitress. You work here to serve us, don't you? Well, we're deciding that your service today isn't worth a penny." Emily's throat tightened. The word stung. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to belittle her because she wore an apron instead of a suit, but today, the weight of exhaustion and worry made her feel unbearably small. She looked around, hoping another customer might intervene, but the bistro was bustling with the usual afternoon crowd, all too absorbed in their own worlds to notice the confrontation unfolding. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the check, her knuckles white. I really have to insist," she said softly, her eyes flicking nervously to the door. "If you refuse to pay, I'll have no choice but to call the owner." The men exchanged amused glances. "Call the owner? You think Mr. Sullivan will bother himself with a measly bill?" one laughed. "He's a billionaire. Busy running his empire. I doubt he'd waste a second on a waitress like you." Emily's heart sank further, but deep down, she refused to give in. She knew her rights, and she also knew that standing up for herself was the only way to survive in a world that often undervalued people like her. Just as she braced herself for another round of mocking, the door swung open. Emily's eyes widened, and the 3 men stiffened as a tall figure walked in. Every head in the restaurant turned slightly, drawn by the commanding presence of the newcomer. Jonathan Sullivan, the billionaire owner of Magnolia Bistro, had arrived. Dressed casually but with an unmistakable air of authority, he scanned the room quickly, his piercing blue eyes landing on Emily. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The 3 men shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that they were no longer the ones in control. It's nothing, really," the first man began, but Jonathan didn't flinch. Emily, seizing the opportunity, explained briefly what had happened. She described how the men had refused to pay, how they mocked her, and how she felt powerless. As she spoke, she noticed Jonathan's expression harden, not with anger at her, but with a deep, protective sense of justice. Jonathan turned to the 3 men, his voice cutting through the low murmur of the restaurant. "You think it's acceptable to treat my staff this way?" The tallest of the 3 men opened his mouth to reply, but Jonathan's gaze was unwavering, making him falter. We didn't mean," he began, but Jonathan interrupted, his tone cold now. "Not mean. You don't get to decide what's acceptable here. My employees are the backbone of this restaurant. Without them, you wouldn't even have the luxury of sitting here in your fancy suits. You will pay your bill, every penny, and you will apologize." The 3 men swallowed nervously, suddenly aware that their arrogance had a limit, and that limit had just walked through the door. They reached into their wallets and hastily pulled out cash, throwing it on the table, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Emily felt a wave of relief and gratitude. She tried to smile, but the tension in her body only began to ease slightly. Jonathan walked over and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I've got your back," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. The three men, unable to meet Jonathan's gaze, muttered their apologies and quickly exited the restaurant, leaving behind a lingering tension that felt almost palpable. The other diners, having witnessed the confrontation, applauded softly, acknowledging the courage of both Emily and Jonathan. Jonathan turned back to Emily, his face softening into a warm, encouraging smile. "You handled that with more grace than most people could," he said. "It's not easy to stand up for yourself, especially when people try to intimidate you. But you did it." Emily felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by emotion. Thank you for coming," she whispered. Jonathan chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "No, thank you. I know it might not seem like much, but defending those who work hard and stay honest is the most important part of any business, or any life. Never let anyone make you feel small for doing the right thing." For the first time that day, Emily truly breathed. She realized that her courage, even when paired with fear, had made a difference, not only for herself but for everyone watching. And she learned something else, too, that sometimes, help arrives when you least expect it, not because the world owes you, but because someone who believes in fairness refuses to stay silent. As the restaurant returned to its usual hum of activity, Emily moved through the tables with renewed confidence. Customers smiled at her, some offering words of encouragement, but it was Jonathan's presence, his quiet belief in her strength, that left the deepest impression. By the end of the afternoon, Emily knew something fundamental about life had shifted. She understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was standing tall even when fear gripped your heart. And she realized that kindness and respect, when met with persistence and integrity, could create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine. The three men never returned, but the story of their arrogance and her bravery spread through the bistro, reminding everyone that dignity and honesty were always worth standing up for. Emily walked out of her shift that evening exhausted but proud, knowing she had faced a storm of arrogance and come through with her head high, supported by someone who believed in doing what was right. And in that quiet moment, as she stepped into the soft glow of the setting sun outside Magnolia Bistro, Emily Carter knew that life would continue to test her, but now she had proof that courage, integrity, and a little help from those who care could overcome even the most daunting challenges.